Hello and welcome to this episode of The Fisher's Voice. It's nice to be talking to you. You have had an illustrious career at sea, so what I'd like you to do for us before we get into talking about your role as chairman of the Seafood Offshore Renewable Energy Working Group is just tell us a little bit about your life at sea.
Sure, so I went to sea as a cadet in Irish shipping back in 1973 and spent from 73 through to November 84. Irish shipping went into liquidation overnight in November 84, and just prior to that I'd been doing some work with the Commissioners of Irish Lights during my leave periods from Irish shipping. So the good Lord minding me, I moved from Irish shipping in liquidation, worked with Liquidator for a while out of Mombasa at the end of the Irish Cedar, and then came home and then pretty much went into Irish Lights, working on the Granuaile and the Atlanta that people around the coast will know the ships well, and a little while on the Grey Seal that we had. And then I stayed at sea with Irish Lights back through to the back end of 2000. I brought the new Granuaile back. I was the first master on the new Granuaile, brought her back from Holland and Germany in January 2000 and worked on her until the back end of 2000 when I came ashore. I worked in various roles ashore, inspecting aids to navigation, director of operations, director of navigation, engineering, various roles like that. And retired from Irish Lights then in the middle of COVID, in October 2020. And have been doing small bits since retirement. I do a little bit of volunteering with the RNLI on the Operations Committee. I'm on the board of Galway Harbour, and then in May of this year I took up this role as chair of the Seafood ORE Working Group. Fantastic.
So your whole life has revolved around the sea primarily, so that's why you were chosen presumably for this role as chairman. So can you tell us, Robert, what is the group, who set it up, and who are the members of the group, and what's the purpose of the group?
Sure, yeah, so the group, I guess if you spoke to the members of the group, they'd all say the group should have been operating maybe 2-3 years ago, and that would have made our lives much easier.
Right.
We're set up like a lot of these things maybe just that little bit late. But the group was established by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, who have responsibility for maritime planning in Ireland, along with the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and the Department of Environment, Communications and Climate. So the three departments together worked, but the primary department is the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. So I applied for the position, they advertised the position of chair. I thought it was really interesting, and one of the reasons people often say to me, why would you take on that job? It seems a tough job, you know. I suppose, as we said earlier, I worked a lot on the Irish coast, going around inspecting aids to navigation, speaking to people involved in all of the activity around the coast, be it fishing, aquaculture, seaweed, commercial shipping, all of that. And the one thing I think you develop when you do that is a great respect for people who make their living from the sea, in whatever way. It really is. It's a tough space to make your money in, and I have a great respect for that. And I like the idea of marine spatial planning. In a previous role, I was involved in that process, but I do like the idea that as best we can, we should be sharing that maritime space and that maritime resource. And that takes a little bit of work. So I liked the role. I thought that'll be challenging, but I don't mind a bit of challenge. And I like the idea that we could do something for the coastal communities and the maritime communities. And that's why I'm in the role. That's what I pitched when I applied to be chair.
Fantastic. And what is the role, or what is the group? I mean, there's probably not a huge understanding outside of the core group involved. So can you tell us what is it made up of, and what do each of them bring, and what do each of them hope to get out of it?
Sure. So, I mean, the primary objectives of the group, certainly in this first phase, because our first meeting was July of this year, so we've had 5 meetings now. Just finished a meeting today, which is here in the Customs House where we're recording this. So we've had 5 meetings. The main objective is, firstly, engagement, good, constructive, meaningful engagement between the ORE sector, who are quite new in the maritime space in Ireland. You know, if you leave aside the Arklow Bank, they're very new. With the seafood sector. And it's really important that we see the seafood sector as not just the large fishing vessels, but absolutely fishing, but the smaller fishermen, the sub 12 metre, sub 10 metre boats, which make up such an important part of that industry. And then, as I say, aquaculture, seafood, angling, sea angling, and anybody who's making their living in that seafood space, well, then they have a right to be represented on the group. Okay. So the group is made up of, at the moment, there's about 17 organisations that represent that seafood sector. There's 4 organisations representing ORE developers. There's 3 government departments represented on it, and then 7 sort of agencies, state agencies. So people like AirGrid, the Seafishers Protection Authority, Commissioners of Irish Lights, the SEAI, the Marine Institute, organisations like that who are important facilitators for the sector. So say primarily engagement, a very strong objective is to draw up a document that will be a standard for how engagement should take place between the offshore renewable energy business and the seafood sector.
Right, okay, very good. So the intention would be then that take, for example, fishermen or any other users of the sea could look at this document and know kind of what rights they could expect in terms of engagement when a project would be coming to their area or whatever.
Yes, yeah, and it's not all about rights, of course, it's also about responsibilities.
Yes.
And each side, it is really around those marine spatial planning principles of getting people to engage and work together to try and overcome the problems that do arise when you're sharing a space. So, I mean, those principles are around, can you avoid the impacts? Can you reduce the impacts? Can you mitigate them? And it's to start that dialogue. So the document, we're well advanced on it. We hope to have an initial draft in January. It will be readable, it will be accessible, it's written in plain English. It will set out how people should engage, when they should engage, and plainly, the earlier the better. But we are where we are, so we can't go back 2 years, but we are where we are. And to make that engagement meaningful, so there's a lot of issues that will arise, but the document is advancing well, and we would hope to have something for January, which will then be an important part of the phase 2 offshore renewable energy developments. It'll be one of the criteria that they'll be measured against is how well they followed the engagement process that's set out in the document.
Very well. Yeah. The word you keep using, Robert, is engagement. So that seems to be the core of it all. So by engagement you mean everybody knowing what the other person is planning and thinking. Yeah? Yeah,
I think it goes beyond that. I think to be meaningful, it has to be not just knowing, not just sharing information and data, but being willing then to listen, to say, well, within that, one of the issues that arises, if I give an example, is most of the offshore renewable energy developments that you see have a very large foreshore area that they're looking to get a marine area consent for. Within that area, only a very small part of it will actually feature wind turbines when the final project is delivered, assuming that particular project is delivered. So engagement on that can be really important in terms of what area within that space is most suitable for the offshore renewable energy development, but also what area within that space has the most fishing activity and how seasonal is that. So whether it's for the final development itself or for the survey activity associated with it, that engagement can actually make a difference. And people can say, well, we were going to survey that area in July, but maybe we can survey it in a different month if that's the month that interferes with the fishing activity. And that's what we mean by meaningful and constructive and people sharing.
So what's your advice to fishermen that are faced with the choice of whether or not to engage?
Well, I'd always say engage, and look to have a quality engagement. If you feel people aren't engaging well, press them to engage better in both directions, because information is really important to understand. If I link back to something I said earlier about knowing the Irish coast, I do, of course, but I'm not the expert on fishing. The expert on fishing is the fisherman who goes out there every day and fishes, and it's often quite local expertise. It's not necessarily a national picture, but it's often quite a local picture. So that engagement needs that information from the fisherman in the same way that it needs the information from the offshore renewable energy developer as to what they need and what their requirements are. And the same with aquaculture. Aquaculture often tends to be silent in this because people think of it just being fishing. But aquaculture is a really important industry in Ireland today.
Okay. Now, at a macro level, there's big changes happening at a planning level, a legislative level. The Maritime Area Planning Bill, can you give us some idea as to how that will change life for anybody who wishes to secure planning for any development of any sort beyond the 12-mile limit? If I understand correctly, we've had a planning regime up to the 12-mile limit historically, but nothing beyond the 12-mile limit until the Maritime Area Planning Act is kind of properly, am I right in that?
Yeah, I think so. And I should preface it by saying that as chair of the working group, I don't represent any government department. Neither housing nor any of the other departments, so I'm not the spokesperson for the Marine Planning Act by any means, but to me it's a great development. Okay. For years we've had quite a complex system around foreshore licensing, and it's to some extent didn't recognise the size or scale of the development. Okay. So it was quite complex. So from the point of view of offshore renewable energy and a lot of the other licenses, now some aspects still remain with the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine around aquaculture and that area in general. Okay. But it will make it a much more straightforward process, a much more understandable process. When MARA is established early next year, they will take on the licensing of say the surveys and of even simple things like events that might be taking place on a beach will go to a competent planning authority, which for that might be the local authority. Out to sea, MARA will have that responsibility. As you say, until recently, the foreshore limit was 12 miles. Now that planning authority role will stretch further out, right out to the continental shelf. Right. So it solves a lot of problems. It makes a much more understandable system. We're waiting patiently for it to start. I mean, MARA will be established next year, and that process then will start. Various pieces of the act.
So MARA, Robert, the Maritime Area Regulatory Authority, yes. This effectively will be the body that will implement the legislation enacted in the Maritime Area Planning Bill. Is that fair to say? Is it going to be a new planning authority effectively?
I think you could see MARA as having oversight of that and enforcement of that, but the actual decisions regarding, say, a development permission from, say, an offshore renewable energy the developer. If you think of that process, and again, as I say, I'm not the real expert on this, but there's simple enough process there where if you conceive of one of those projects, you have to get a maritime area consent. That will come from MARA.
Okay, so the MARA will issue the MACs, the Maritime Area Consent.
Yeah, but that Maritime Area Consent doesn't give you permission to proceed with the project. It just says that you're a fit and proper person to develop it, that in the view of MARA you have the potential to do that, and it allows you then enter into the system where you will get development permission from on board Planola. You'll get a grid connection from Airgrid, and you will engage in an ORESS auction as to the route to market for the power from your proposal, if you like.
So MARA would be like almost a kind of a pre-filter, like a gatekeeper.
It is, but it's also the enforcement part of it as well. And for more simple licenses, of course, MARA will issue the licenses. So if there's a license for survey activity or something of that nature, some other activity that's below, say, a development level, MARA will issue that license. So they have a role in giving permissions as well.
Very interesting. Okay, so what you're saying is it's going to be the competent authority because they will specialise in the maritime area.
Yes.
So they'll have better knowledge than we've ever had before when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I think a better legislative base. I mean, quite a lot of work done in a very short time to establish that Marine Area Planning Act and give a good legislative base for maritime spatial planning out beyond the 12-mile limit, right out to the continental shelf. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. And now something fishermen are becoming a little bit concerned about is the marine protected areas that are being spoken of now. Up to 30% of the seas will fall into that category, and that's quite a lot of space when you consider what Irish waters are far greater than our landmass, for example. Is there any knowledge yet really has kind of crept out into even at your level?
Certainly not at my level, Sean. It's not an area I'm particularly involved in, so I wouldn't have an awful lot of knowledge of it. Right. I mean, it is outlined quite clearly in the Act how that would work. There's other parts of the Act too that dealing with designated marine area plans, which are probably more relevant to the Seafood ORE working group, in the sense that in time imagine there would be a plan-led approach to ORE, and indeed there could be a plan-led approach to fishing, and it's for fishing representatives to look at that and see where the benefits to that seafood community is in things like that. But marine protected areas isn't something we're dealing with per se.
Understood. And as I look at areas like Newfoundland, for example, where traditionally were strong fishing areas, the wind farms have developed very well over there, and I notice the younger generation of fishermen seem to get about half of their income now from wind farm support. Do you think it's likely that in the future, the young men of the sea, the sons and daughters of our fishermen, will become suddenly a hot property, very necessary, very important for this new development?
Yeah, I think there's real opportunities there as well. There are, of course, challenges, and we naturally spend a lot of our time trying to deal with the challenges and work through them. But there are real opportunities as well. Now, there are issues to deal with there always, around safety, to make sure that the boats involved are suitable for the work, and issues around boats that will be on the fishing register and also doing commercial work, issues around crew training and standards of certification and so on. But all of those issues are things we're discussing in the group. We're not the final arbiter of it, but we are a really good place to bring those issues to the surface, and we're engaging then with the departments involved and with the authorities involved to see what can be done there. So I think there's a real goodwill element from the developers themselves and from the seafood community to try and make the best of those opportunities for Ireland, because these are opportunities for Ireland. It would be a shame to see all of this development take place and Ireland not get the best out of that, apart from the benefit we get from the energy itself, but the best from the opportunities to as much as possible into construction and the support of these projects.
Yeah, and of course, the benefit from the energy is absolutely enormous. I mean, if this works, my understanding is that 15 years from now, it will be as good as if we had found multiple oil and gas fields down around the coast of Ireland.
Yes,
we'll become utterly and entirely self-sufficient and possibly a net exporter of electricity.
Yeah. No, there's real opportunities there, and while part of me looks back to the Arklow Bank 20 years ago and work on that, and the real sense at that time that something would happen. But maybe we will benefit from not being at the leading edge, because the technology is changing so fast and getting so much more efficient, and offshore floating wind wouldn't have been a possibility back then. That's what's going to deliver a lot of the West Coast energy. But it is a project for Ireland, and certainly while the phase one projects have been developer-led, mainly in the REC and one off Scared Rocks near Sline Head. The phase two and then ultimately the phase three projects be much more plan-led, and it is about what's Ireland's requirement. It's not about what's the developer's requirement, but what's Ireland's requirement in this. And it's really refreshing to hear spokespersons for various departments emphasising that and saying it's about what's our energy need at that time. That's the amount of projects that will be put into the approval process. And come 2030 and beyond, if we're getting up to 30 gigawatts of offshore renewable energy, that's a significant benefit for Ireland in terms of economy, in terms of the coastal communities where that's taken place. There are areas that are not big developments at the moment, so there's a lot of opportunities there as well. But we have to work through to make sure that's delivered well, both for the national picture and then for the local picture as well.
Yeah, and the floating technology, that's really what's going to open up the large areas to us. My understanding is the fixed bottom towers are really only suitable up to a depth of about 60 metres, if I understand correctly. So
I think that's spot on.
So if we are to move further out to west, we could be 100 kilometres offshore with these floating farms.
Yeah, no, and it's a really exciting technology, and it's an area where our Irish seafarers and have worked before. I mean, we have a lot of Irish people worked in offshore industries, the North Sea and well beyond that. So there is experience there. There are companies in Ireland well experienced in this area, and just intuitively, you'd like to see them get the benefit of it.
So in the main, it's a good news story for Ireland. It's a good news story for seafarers of all sorts, whether they be from fishing backgrounds or merchant shipping or wherever. The sea is going to become more important to our country. Traditionally, it should have been important as an island nation, but probably wasn't seen that way. It's economically, it's going to become very important to us, and socially even now. I think government policy seems to be firmly behind harnessing the power of the wind at sea.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I'd always want to be careful not to underplay that there are real concerns within the seafood industry about the impact on their livelihoods. And people who want to stay involved in the seafood industry, they're not looking to move into an alternative business. They would probably welcome the advantage of being able to take on some extra activity, but they still do want to be involved in seafood, as I say, whether it's fishing or aquaculture or any other part of that seafood chain. People still want to be involved in that. And of course, such an important industry for the future in terms of food security. We have energy security from the offshore renewables, but food security, fish is going to play probably an increasing part in the future. So it is something we want to try and find that space for both of those industries to thrive.
Robert Mc Cabe, Chairman of the Seafood Offshore Renewable Energy Working Group, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you.